Jake Collins had never expected to be part of the most important moment in human history. He was just a junior officer aboard the diplomatic vessel Starward Dawn, and his job was simple. He carried data pads, he poured drinks, he stood in the background and tried not to get in anyone's way. The real important people were Admiral Patricia Walsh and Chief Negotiator Greg Santos. They were the ones who would talk to the aliens. They were the ones who would make history. Jake was just there to help with the small things. But today, everything felt different. Today, the Valorians were coming. The Valorians were one of the oldest civilizations in the galaxy. They had been traveling between stars when humans were still living in caves. Their empire stretched across thousands of worlds, and they had technology that humans could barely understand. They were tall, beautiful beings with silver skin that seemed to glow with inner light. Their eyes were large and deep purple, and when they looked at you, it felt like they could see into your soul. For months, human diplomats had been trying to arrange this meeting. The Valorians had ignored most of humanity's attempts at contact. They saw humans as children, as newcomers who had barely learned to walk among the stars. But then human colonists had accidentally settled on a planet that contained ancient Valorian artifacts, and suddenly, the Valorians wanted to talk. Jake stood near the back of the reception hall as the Valorian ship approached. Through the large windows, he could see it growing larger and larger. The human ship was considered impressive by Earth standards. But the Valorian vessel made it look like a toy. It was enormous, shaped like a flowing piece of art, with lights that pulsed like a heartbeat. "Remember," Admiral Walsh said to her team, "we are here to listen and show respect. Do not speak unless spoken to. Do not make sudden movements. And for the love of everything, do not touch anything." Jake gripped his serving tray a little tighter. His hands were sweating. He had never been this nervous in his life. The Valorian delegation arrived in a flash of blue light. One moment the center of the room was empty, and the next moment a dozen aliens stood there as if they had always been present. Jake's breath caught in his throat. At the front of the group stood the most magnificent being Jake had ever seen. She was taller than any human, draped in robes that seemed to be made of living light. Colors shifted and flowed across the fabric like water. Her silver face was beautiful but cold, like a statue carved from moonlight. This was Queen Sarathvin, ruler of the Valorian Empire. Around her stood warriors in gleaming armor, advisors in formal robes, and servants carrying strange objects. But Jake's eyes were drawn to a small figure standing beside the queen. It was a child, a boy who looked about 6 years old by human standards. He had the same silver skin as the others, but his features were softer, younger. His purple eyes were wide and curious as he looked around the room. This was Prince Kael Rix, the Queen's only son. The formal greetings began. Admiral Walsh stepped forward and bowed in the way they had been taught. She spoke words of welcome that had been carefully prepared by experts in alien culture. The Queen responded with a slight nod, her voice cold and distant. "We are here for our artifacts," Queen Sarathvin said. "Nothing more. Do not mistake this meeting for friendship. Your kind is young and foolish. You settled on sacred ground without understanding what you had found." Jake watched from his position near the wall. The negotiations were not going well. The Valorians made it clear that they thought very little of humans. They spoke about humanity the way someone might speak about insects, with mild annoyance and no real interest. The reception continued. Servants from both sides offered food and drinks. Jake moved through the room, offering refreshments to anyone who wanted them. Most of the Valorians ignored him completely. He was beneath their notice, just another primitive human doing primitive human tasks. And then something strange happened. Jake was standing near the back of the room, holding his tray and trying to stay out of the way. He was watching the Queen speak with Admiral Walsh when he felt something bump against his leg. He looked down. Prince Caelrix was standing right next to him. The small alien boy had crossed the entire room without anyone noticing. He had walked past warriors, past advisors, past the most important humans in the delegation. And now he was looking up at Jake with those huge purple eyes. Jake said, because he had no idea what else to say. The boy reached up and grabbed Jake's hand. His small fingers were cool and smooth, like polished stone. Then he wrapped his arms around Jake's leg and held on tight. The room went silent. Jake looked up in panic. Everyone was staring at him. The Valorian warriors had drawn their weapons, strange devices that hummed with energy. The advisors looked shocked. Admiral Walsh had gone pale. Queen Seraphine turned slowly to face Jake. Her expression was impossible to read. She stared at him for a long moment, then looked down at her son, who was still clinging to Jake's leg like he never wanted to let go. "What is happening?" Admiral Walsh asked, her voice shaking. The Queen did not answer immediately. She walked toward Jake with slow, deliberate steps. The warriors parted to let her pass. She stopped just a few feet away, looking down at her child. "Caelrix," she said softly. "Are you certain?" The boy nodded without looking at his mother. He pressed his face against Jake's leg and held on tighter. Queen Seraphine closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them again, she looked directly at Jake. There was something in her gaze that he could not understand. It might have been surprise. It might have been respect. It might have been sadness. "My son has selected you," she said, her voice carrying through the silent room, "as his father." Jake felt like the floor had disappeared beneath his feet. He could not move. He could not speak. He could not even breathe. Around him, chaos began to erupt. Humans were shouting questions. Valorians were arguing in their own language. Warriors were demanding answers. Advisors were rushing toward the Queen. But Jake just stood there, frozen, with a small alien child holding on to his hand like he was the only thing in the universe that mattered. The next few hours were the most confusing of Jake's entire life. He was taken to a small room and told to wait. Guards stood outside his door, both human and Valorian. He could hear people arguing in the hallway, voices raised in anger and confusion. Nobody would tell him what was happening. Nobody would explain what the Queen had meant. All he knew was that a small alien child had chosen him for something, and now the entire diplomatic mission was falling apart. Finally, the door opened. Admiral Walsh entered, followed by a Valorian advisor and a human scientist named Dr. Lisa Park, who specialized in alien cultures. They all looked exhausted and worried. "Sit down, Lieutenant," Admiral Walsh said. Her voice was tired. "We need to explain some things to you." Jake sat. His legs felt weak anyway. Dr. Park pulled up information on her data pad. "The Valorians have a tradition called the selection," she began. "It goes back thousands of years. Among their people, children are born with strong psychic abilities. These abilities fade as they grow older, but when they are young, Valorian children can sense things that adults cannot." Jake nodded slowly. He did not understand yet, but he was trying. "Royal children are special," Dr. Park continued. "When a prince or princess reaches a certain age, they perform the selection. Their psychic abilities guide them to choose a second parent, someone who will help raise them and shape them into the leader they are meant to become. This second parent is not related by blood. They are chosen by the child's soul." "So the prince chose me," Jake said. His voice sounded strange to his own ears. "To be his second parent." "His father," the Valorian advisor said. He was an older male with deep lines on his silver face. The selection is sacred law among our people. It cannot be questioned. It cannot be undone. The child's choice is final. Admiral Walsh leaned forward. Do you understand what this means, Jake? In 10,000 years of Valorian history, the selection has never chosen someone who was not Valorian. This has never happened before. Jake felt dizzy. Why me? He asked. I'm nobody. I'm just a junior officer. I carry drinks and data pads. There must be some mistake. The Valorian advisor shook his head. The selection does not make mistakes. The child's psychic gift sees what others cannot. It sees the soul. It sees what a person will become and what they can help others become. Prince Kael'rix looked at every being in that room, human and Valorian alike. He saw admirals and warriors and nobles, and he chose you. Outside the room, Jake could hear more arguing. Someone was shouting in the Valorian language, their voice full of anger. Not everyone is happy about this, Admiral Walsh said quietly. There are many among the Valorians who think this is an insult to their people. They want the selection declared void. Can they do that? Jake asked. No, the advisor said firmly. High Counselor Dravensol demands it, but the Queen will not allow it. The selection is sacred. Even she cannot change it. But this does not mean he will stop fighting against it. Many in the court share his feelings. They believe a human is not worthy of raising their future emperor. Jake sat in silence for a long moment. His mind was spinning. Just this morning, he had been worried about spilling drinks on important people. Now he was somehow connected to the future of an alien empire. What happens now? He finally asked. Admiral Walsh and the advisor exchanged a look. Neither of them seemed to want to answer. You have a choice, Dr. Park said gently. You can refuse. The selection requires acceptance from both parties. If you say no, Prince Kael'rix will grow up without a second parent. Is that bad? The Valorian advisor's expression grew sad. It is considered a great shame in our culture. The child would be seen as unlucky, possibly even cursed. He would face this stigma for the rest of his life. Many would say his soul was too weak to attract a worthy parent. Jake felt his stomach twist. He thought about the small boy with the purple eyes, clinging to his leg with such trust and hope. He thought about what it would mean to walk away, to leave that child alone with a mark of shame that would follow him forever. And if I accept? Jake asked. Then you would come with us, the advisor said. You would live in the imperial palace on our homeworld. You would help raise the prince until he reaches adulthood. You would be given the title and rights of a royal father, but you would also leave your own world behind. You would live among people who do not want you there, who will work against you at every opportunity. Admiral Walsh reached out and put her hand on Jake's arm. No one would blame you for refusing, she said. This is an impossible situation. You did not ask for this. Jake was quiet for a long time. He thought about Earth, about his small apartment, about his family and friends. He thought about his career, which had never been particularly impressive, but was still his own. He thought about everything he would lose. Then he thought about Kael'rix. He thought about a child who had looked at a room full of powerful people and had chosen the one person who seemed to have nothing special about him. He thought about what kind of man would walk away from a kid who needed him. Can I see him? Jake asked. The prince. Can I see him before I decide? They brought Kael'rix to him a few minutes later. The small boy walked into the room and immediately ran to Jake. He climbed onto the chair next to him and took Jake's hand in both of his small ones. You will stay? Kael'rix asked. His voice was soft and musical. His purple eyes were filled with hope and fear. Please, I chose you. My heart chose you. Please do not leave me." Jake looked into those eyes. He saw a child who was scared and lonely, who had made a choice that his entire world was telling him was wrong. He saw a kid who just wanted someone to love him. Jake had never wanted children. He had never planned to be a father. But looking at this small alien boy, he felt something shift inside his chest. "Yeah," Jake said quietly. He squeezed the boy's small hands. "Yeah, kid, I will stay." Kaelrix made a sound of pure joy and threw his arms around Jake's neck. He held on tight, and Jake could feel him trembling with relief. Over the boy's shoulder, Jake saw Queen Sarathvin standing in the doorway. She was watching them with an expression he could not read. Then, slowly, she nodded at him. It was not quite approval, but it was a start. Jake hugged the child back and tried not to think about how completely his life had just changed. He was going to be a father now. A father to an alien prince in a world that hated him. But as Kaelrix held on to him, Jake found that he did not regret his choice. Not even a little bit. 6 months had passed since Jake arrived on the Valorian homeworld, and every single day had been a struggle. The Imperial Palace was the most beautiful place Jake had ever seen. It was built from something the Valorians called star crystal, a material that glowed with soft inner light. The walls changed colors with the time of day, shifting from pale gold in the morning to deep blue at night. Gardens filled with alien flowers surrounded towers that reached toward the purple sky. Everything was elegant, ancient, and perfect, and Jake had never felt more alone in his life. The Valorians did not want him there. They made this clear in 100 small ways every single day. When he walked through the halls, courtiers would stop talking and stare at him with cold eyes. When he entered a room, people would leave. When he tried to speak, they would pretend not to understand him, even though most of them spoke perfect human language. High Counselor Dravensol was the worst. He was a tall, stern warrior who had spent his life serving the Empire. He believed that tradition was sacred and that humans were little better than animals. He had opposed the selection from the beginning, and he had not stopped fighting against it. "The human should be kept away from the prince," Dravensol would say in council meetings. "His primitive influence will corrupt the boy. He will make our future emperor weak." The queen always overruled him, but Jake knew that Dravensol was not alone in his feelings. Many in the court agreed with him. They saw Jake as a disease that had infected their royal family. Jake's quarters were in a distant corner of the palace, far from everyone else. The rooms were large and comfortable, but they felt like a prison. He spent his nights alone, studying the Valorian language from datapads, trying to understand a culture that did not want to be understood by him. The language was hard. The sounds were different from anything in human speech, and the grammar made no sense to his earth-trained mind. But Jake was stubborn. He had always been stubborn. His mother used to say it was his greatest strength and his biggest flaw. Every night he would practice until his throat was sore. Every morning he would try again, slowly, word by word, phrase by phrase, he learned. After 3 months, he could understand basic conversations. After 5 months, he could speak well enough to be understood. The courtiers were surprised when Jake started responding to their insults in their own language. They were even more surprised when he began quoting their own poets and philosophers back at them. Some of them looked at him differently after that. Not with warmth, but with something like grudging respect. But the most important part of Jake's life was Kaelrix. Valorian parents were formal and distant with their children. It was their tradition. Children were trained, not nurtured. They were given teachers and tutors who would shape them into proper adults. Physical affection was rare. Emotional connection was considered weakness. Jake ignored all of this. Every day he would visit Caelrix in the royal nursery. He would play games with him, silly human games like hide and seek and tag. He would tell him stories about Earth, about forests and oceans and animals that the boy had never seen. He would ask about his day and actually listen to the answers, no matter how small or ordinary they seemed. At first, the Valorian tutors were horrified. They complained to the queen, to the council, to anyone who would listen. This human was ruining the prince with his strange primitive ways, but Caelrix was changing. The sad, quiet boy who had clung to Jake's leg on that first day was becoming someone different. He laughed now. He asked questions. He had opinions and ideas that he was not afraid to share. He was coming alive. One day, Jake was watching Caelrix during a training exercise. The boy was learning to use his psychic abilities, moving objects with his mind. It was difficult work and Caelrix was tired. He stumbled during a practice run and fell hard on the stone floor. His knee hit the ground with a painful crack, and he cried out in pain. The Valorian instructors stood over him with cold eyes. "Get up," one of them said. "Pain is nothing. A prince does not show weakness." Caelrix tried to stand, but his leg hurt too much. Tears were running down his silver cheeks. Jake was across the room before he even realized he was moving. He pushed past the instructors and knelt beside the boy. "Hey, hey," he said softly. "Let me see." The instructors protested. "This is not proper," one of them said. "The prince must learn to overcome pain." Jake ignored them. He gently examined Caelrix's knee. It was scraped and bleeding, but not seriously hurt. He pulled a small medical kit from his pocket. He had learned to carry one after the first few weeks and began cleaning the wound. "It hurts," Caelrix whispered. "I know," Jake said. "It is okay that it hurts. Getting hurt does not make you weak. Crying does not make you weak. What matters is what you do after you fall down. And you know what you do?" Caelrix sniffled. "What?" Jake smiled and pressed a bandage gently over the scrape. "You let yourself feel the pain. Then you get up and try again. But you do not have to pretend it does not hurt. That is just lying to yourself, and lying to yourself is never a good idea." The instructors watched in silence. They did not understand. To them, this was weakness, coddling, foolishness. But Caelrix looked up at Jake with shining eyes. "Will you stay with me?" he asked. "Until I try again?" "Kid," Jake said, "I will stay with you as long as you need me." He helped Caelrix to his feet. The boy wiped his eyes, took a deep breath, and walked back to the training area. This time, when he fell, he got up on his own. And when he finally completed the exercise, he looked at Jake with a smile that could have lit up the whole palace. That night, Jake found something outside his door. It was a small flower made of star crystal, the kind of thing that only grew in the royal gardens. There was no note, but he knew it was from Caelrix. Jake put it on his windowsill where it caught the light of the alien moons. He looked at it for a long time, and for the first time since he had arrived on this world, he did not feel quite so alone. Word of the incident spread through the palace. Some laughed at the foolish human and his soft ways. But others, especially the younger Valorians and the servants who worked in the shadows, began to watch Jake with new eyes. Maybe, some of them whispered, there was something to this human after all. Maybe the selection had not been wrong. The attack came without warning on a quiet evening in the 3rd year of Jake's life on the Valorian homeworld. Jake was walking through the gardens with Caelrix, who was now 9 years old by human counting. The boy had grown taller, but he still had the same curious eyes and the same bright smile that appeared whenever Jake was near. They were talking about a book Jake had been reading to him, an old Earth story about a boy who found a dragon. Then, the sky exploded. Ships appeared above the palace, dozens of them, firing weapons that tore through the star crystal towers. Alarms screamed across the gardens. Guards ran in every direction. The beautiful, peaceful evening became chaos and fire in the span of a heartbeat. Jake grabbed Caelrix and pulled him down behind a stone fountain. "Stay low," he said, his heart pounding. "Stay with me." The attackers were called the Hollow Sun. Jake had heard about them in council meetings. They were a rebel group who believed the Valorian Empire had become weak and corrupt. They hated the Queen for allowing humans into their sacred spaces. Their leader had promised to cleanse the Empire of alien influence, starting with the human contamination of the royal bloodline, starting with Jake, and with Caelrix, the prince who had chosen him. Explosions rocked the palace. Through the smoke and fire, Jake could see Valorian warriors fighting back, but there were too many enemies. The rebels had planned this well. They had waited for the moment when defenses were weakest. "We need to find the guards," Caelrix said, his voice shaking. "They will protect us." Jake looked around. The guards were fighting or dead. There was no one coming to help them. They were alone. "New plan," Jake said. He tried to keep his voice calm, even though his hands were trembling. "We are going to get to safety ourselves." "How?" "The rebels are everywhere." Jake thought fast. Over the past 3 years, he had explored every corner of this palace. He had made friends with the servants, the cleaners, the workers who kept everything running. They had shown him things that the nobles did not know about, hidden passages and forgotten tunnels that ran beneath the ancient stones. "I know a way," Jake said, "but you need to trust me and do exactly what I say. Can you do that?" Caelrix nodded. His small hand gripped Jake's tightly. They moved through the gardens, staying in the shadows. When rebel soldiers appeared, Jake pulled Caelrix into hiding behind walls and under bushes. He had no weapon, no armor, nothing but his wits and his knowledge of the palace. They reached a small door hidden behind a decorative wall. Jake had discovered it months ago when a friendly servant named Tella had shown him the maintenance areas. He pushed it open and led Caelrix inside. The tunnels were dark and narrow. Jake used a small light from his pocket to guide them. They moved quickly, their footsteps echoing in the ancient passages. "Father," Caelrix whispered, using the word he had started calling Jake 2 years ago, "I hear someone." Jake stopped. Ahead, he could see shadows moving. Rebel soldiers had found the tunnels too. He thought quickly. There was a cooling system nearby that pumped cold air throughout the palace. Jake had seen it during his explorations. He pulled Caelrix into a side passage and found the control panel. "Cover your ears," he whispered. He triggered the emergency release. A massive cloud of freezing vapor burst into the main tunnel, filling it with white fog so thick that nobody could see through it. Jake heard the soldiers shouting in confusion, unable to find their way. He grabbed Caelrix's hand and ran. They moved through tunnel after tunnel, always staying one step ahead of their pursuers. When soldiers blocked one path, Jake found another. When a passage collapsed from the fighting above, he remembered an alternate route. Every piece of knowledge he had gathered over 3 years, every conversation with servants and workers, every exploration of forgotten corners, all of it became useful. At one point, they encountered a group of 3 rebel soldiers in a narrow hallway. There was no way around them. Caelrix's eyes began to glow with psychic energy. "I can stop them," he said. "I can push them away." Jake put his hand on the boy's shoulder. "Wait," he said. "But father, they want to hurt us." "I know." But using your powers to attack people is not who you are going to be. Jake looked into his son's eyes. A good leader finds another way. Always. Do you understand? Cale Rix hesitated, then nodded. The glow faded from his eyes. Jake stepped forward. The soldiers saw him and raised their weapons. "Wait!" Jake said in perfect Valorian. He had practiced so hard for so many hours that now the words came easily. "You do not want to do this." "The human," one soldier growled. "The contamination. Kill him." "I know you are angry," Jake continued. "I know you feel that the Empire has lost its way, but the prince is just a child. Whatever you think of me, he is innocent. He is your future. If you kill him, you destroy everything you claim to love." The soldiers hesitated. One of them, a young female with uncertain eyes, lowered her weapon slightly. "We could take him," she said to the others. "Use him as a hostage. Killing him gains us nothing." While they argued, Jake noticed a damaged section of ceiling above them. The fighting had weakened the support beams. He picked up a chunk of broken stone and threw it hard at the weakest point. The ceiling came down between them and the soldiers. When the dust cleared, Jake and Cale Rix were on one side, and the rebels were trapped on the other. They ran. Finally, after what felt like hours, they reached the secure bunker where the Queen and her loyal forces were holding out. The heavy doors opened, and Jake stumbled inside, carrying an exhausted Cale Rix in his arms. The room fell silent. Queen Sarathvin stood in the center. Surrounded by warriors and advisors, High Counselor Dravensol was there too, his armor scorched from battle. They all stared at Jake with expressions of disbelief. "He came through the old tunnels," someone whispered. "Without weapons, without powers. He carried the prince through a war zone." Dravensol's face was unreadable. For years he had tried to have Jake removed. He had called him weak, primitive, unworthy. And now here was this human, standing in front of them, having done what trained warriors could not. Queen Sarathvin walked toward Jake. Her silver face was marked with dust and smoke, but her eyes were shining. She stopped in front of him and looked at her son, safe in his father's arms. Then she did something she had never done before. She bowed her head to Jake. A gesture of deep respect that was reserved for heroes and honored warriors. "You have proven yourself," she said, her voice carrying through the silent room. "Father of my son." Jake did not know what to say. He was tired and scared, and his whole body ached. But he looked at Cale Rix, who was smiling up at him with complete trust and love, and he knew that every struggle had been worth it. The battle ended hours later. The rebels were defeated, but the stories of that night spread across the Empire like wildfire. The human who had no powers, the human who had protected the prince with nothing but his mind and his heart, the human who had proven that strength was not always about fighting. Sometimes it was about finding another way. 15 years had passed since the night of the Hollow Sun attack. The Valorian Empire had changed in ways that nobody could have predicted, and at the center of that change stood Prince Cale Rix, now a young man preparing to become emperor. Jake watched from the gallery above the Imperial Council chamber as his son addressed the most powerful beings in the galaxy. Cale Rix was tall now, with the same silver skin and purple eyes as his mother, but there was something different about him, something that set him apart from every Valorian leader who had come before. He smiled, he laughed, he listened when others spoke. He asked questions not to test people, but because he genuinely wanted to understand their answers. Jake's hair had turned gray over the years, and his joints ached on cold mornings. He was getting old by human standards, though the Valorians with their longer lifespans still considered him relatively young. But he did not mind the gray hair or the aches. Every line on his face, every tired bone in his body was a reminder of the life he had built in this strange and wonderful place. The Empire had changed around them. Human ideas had spread through Valorian culture in ways that nobody had expected. Music from Earth played in the markets. Human books were translated and read by millions. Valorian children played games that Jake had taught to Caelryx years ago. The cold, formal society was learning to laugh, to play, to connect with each other in new ways. Not everyone was happy about these changes. Traditionalists complained that the Empire was losing its identity. They blamed Jake, the human contamination who had infected their prince with strange ideas. High Counselor Dravensol was still alive, still fighting against the changes. He was old now, his silver skin faded and his movements slow. But his hatred had not dimmed with age. Today he stood before the council to make one last challenge. "The prince proposes to open our borders," Dravensol said, his voice sharp with contempt. "He wants to invite every species in the galaxy into our sacred empire. This is madness. This is the final corruption of our traditions." Caelryx stood calmly at the center of the chamber. He was not angry at the old counselor's words. Jake had taught him that anger was a choice, and that it rarely led anywhere useful. "Counselor," Caelryx said, his voice clear and strong, "I have great respect for our traditions. They have made us powerful. They have helped us build an empire that has lasted for 10,000 years. But traditions are not meant to be chains. They are meant to be foundations on which we build something greater." Dravensol sneered. "Pretty words. But we all know where these ideas came from. They came from your human father, a primitive creature from a primitive world, who has spent years poisoning your mind with alien thoughts." The chamber fell silent. Everyone looked at Jake, standing in the gallery above. They waited to see how the prince would respond. Caelryx smiled. It was a warm smile, full of love and gratitude. "Yes," he said, "my ideas did come from my father, and I am proud of that." He walked to the center of the chamber and looked up at Jake. Then he turned to address the full council. "When I was a child, I was given a gift. I could see into the souls of others. I could sense what they truly were, beneath their titles and their powers and their pretenses. And when I looked around a room full of admirals and nobles and warriors, I chose a junior officer who was standing in the back holding a tray of drinks." Some of the younger council members laughed softly. The story of the selection had become legend over the years. "Everyone told me I had made a mistake," Caelryx continued. "They said a human could not raise a Valorian prince. They said he was too weak, too primitive, too different. High Counselor Dravensol spent years trying to have him removed. He called my father a contamination, a disease." Caelryx's voice grew stronger. "But my father stayed. He stayed when everyone hated him. He stayed when the court mocked him and the council opposed him. He stayed when rebels attacked the palace and tried to kill us both. He protected me without weapons, without powers, with nothing but his mind and his heart." The chamber was completely silent now. Even Dravensol had stopped sneering. "My father taught me that strength is not about dominance," Caelryx said. "It is about lifting others up. He taught me that a true leader listens more than he speaks. He taught me that crying does not make you weak, and that showing love does not make you foolish. He taught me that the best way to win a fight is to find a way where nobody has to fight at all." He looked directly at Dravensol. "You ask why the Empire should follow a ruler raised by a human. This is my answer. The Valorians have spent 10,000 years believing we were better than everyone else. We looked at other species and saw only primitives, only insects, only beings beneath our notice. And what did that belief give us? Isolation, loneliness, an empire powerful but empty, with subjects who feared us but did not love us. Kaelrix raised his hand toward the gallery where Jake stood. My father taught me to see things differently. He taught me that every species has something valuable to offer. He taught me that the smallest person can change the universe if they refuse to give up. He taught me that love is not weakness. Love is the greatest strength in existence. Jake felt tears running down his weathered cheeks. He did not try to hide them. Kaelrix had taught him that too, in a way. The boy had learned to show emotion, and in doing so, had given Jake permission to do the same. I will open our borders, Kaelrix declared. I will invite the galaxy to join us as partners, not as subjects. I will build an empire based on cooperation instead of domination. And I will do this because a human with no special powers showed me what true strength looks like. He turned back to face the council. The selection chose my father because it knew what I needed to become. I intend to spend my reign proving it right. Now, let us vote. The vote was unanimous. Even some of Dravenzol's traditional allies voted in favor. The old counselor sat down slowly, his face expressionless. He had finally lost. Later, after the council had ended and the crowds had gone home, Kaelrix found Jake on a balcony overlooking the Crystal City. The younger moons were rising, casting silver light across the star crystal towers. "Did I make you proud?" Kaelrix asked quietly. Jake turned to look at his son. The small boy who had once clung to his leg in a strange room full of aliens was now a man, a leader, a future emperor. But in his purple eyes, Jake could still see that same child, searching for approval, hoping that he had done well. Jake pulled his son into a hug. The kind of hug he had given him thousands of times over the years, even when the Valorians had told him it was improper, even when the court had laughed at his primitive human ways. "Every single day," Jake said, his voice rough with emotion. "From the moment you grabbed my hand in that room, you have made me proud every single day." Kaelrix hugged him back, holding on tight, just like he had when he was 6 years old. "Thank you," the prince whispered. "Thank you for staying." Jake smiled and looked out at the city, at the empire that had slowly become his home, at the world that had changed because one small child had seen something in him that nobody else could see. "Thank you for choosing me," he said. They stood together on the balcony, father and son, watching the moons rise over a new era for the Valorian Empire. An era built not on power or fear or ancient tradition, but on something far more powerful. An era built on love. And somewhere in the stars, the selection smiled.